So we are using Google Meets today. If that is unfamiliar for you, this is a quick cheat sheet on how to use it. Most importantly, to get out of the call, you can use the red icon on the center right. And then on the far right is our chat feature. And in the center, we also center icons, and the far left is the microphone on and off. So we will have opportunities in this webinar to unmute and discuss topics. So just keep those ready when the time is right. And this is our chat icon. You also can view participants and see who else is in the room. And if you need more options, they are available. So the Maryland State Arts Council, we have a land acknowledgement project, which through that project we developed, or other wonderful people developed, this statewide land acknowledgement statement I'm going to read. So we acknowledge that the lands and waters now known as Maryland are home of its first peoples, the Akanawa Indian tribe, the Assateague Peoples tribe, the Cedar Band of Piscataway Indians, the Choctaw Band of Indians, the Lenape tribe, the Nanacoke tribe, the Nassewewak Band of Indians, the Piscataway Kanawha tribe, the Piscataway Indian Nation, the Poco Nation, the Susquehannock Indians, Yakagani River Band of Shawnee, and tribes of the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many of the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and the waterways to heal so they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. And I want to share that we have more information about this land acknowledgement on our website, and also learn about the First People Nations, First Nation people of Maryland. Here at the Maryland State Arts Council, we use this equity and justice statement to ground our work, and I'm going to read it. The arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform the individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council and its collaborators are committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. The Maryland State Arts Council and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, class, language, and/or ability. We will reference this as we go because equity and justice are an essential component in the artist selection process. Our vision at the Maryland State Arts Council is to play an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of art. And our mission is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to our quality of life for all the people of Maryland. These are our goals of our current strategic plan. Goal number 1, increase participation. 2, intentional support. 3, build capacity. 4, leverage connections. And number 5, bolster Maryland arts. It's all about Maryland. You're noticing a theme. And our creative meeting actions. So this is a bit of a group project. I'm going to ask that we popcorn through these and read them. You can just unmute when you feel so led and read the next one aloud.
That's such a hunch. Bullshit. What the hell are you doing? Celebrate being in the space with other creative people.
Wesley?
Engage with everyone's presence as a gift.
Acknowledge that together we know a lot.
Enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry.
Share your idea and trust that it will be heard. Thank you.
Use I statements.
Focus your language on the task at hand.
Hold one another accountable with care. Apply yes, and I hear your idea and I'm going to add to it.
Balance speaking and listening. Thank you all. I just love doing that, especially on a Zoom with 41 people. No small task. So that's how we're going to enter the conversation together today. So our agenda for this webinar, I'm going to do some overview of the key decisions for a selection strategy. I'm going to share some common selection processes. I'm going to have an example, and I hope that we will have plenty of time to work through some of your examples. So if you have a project that you're working on at the end, would love to get some people to offer up their project, and we can help you figure out a method that works well and is a good fit for you. Brief public service announcement. If you are on this call because you are considering applying to the Public Art Across Maryland grant with the Maryland State Arts Council, the deadline is December 19th, and we will only have one application process this year. Shout out to, I think Toby's on this call, who recently received a public art grant for the Clara Barton sculpture you see on the screen. And I want to clarify before we get into the different artist selection methods that I'm going to share today. To apply for our public art grant, we do not stipulate how you select your artist. So that is really up to you and what makes most sense for your project. We are asking that you explain yourself. So again, you don't have to follow any one way that I'm going to share today, but you do have to explain your process. So it's likely that you're on this call because you have an awesome public art idea and you're in need of an artist and you're not quite sure how to connect idea to the right artist. So that's what we're going to talk about. There are many ways to select an artist. There's no one right way. And so today we're going to talk about some different possible pathways. So which method is going to work best for your project? So these are the key decisions that are going to help you decide which methods might work best for you. And I do have a PDF for you. I'm going to drop in the chat. This is like a PDF template you can use as we go through today. And especially when we get to the end, if you have questions, you can use this as a reference. So we're going to start with great idea. And before you can really figure out who is the right artist and what pathway makes most sense to your project, you're going to need to know the where, the what, and the why. The why is really the most essential because that's going to be your kind of guiding principles of how to find the right artist for your project. So I'm going to give this example. This is our example we'll use for the rest of the webinar, and we'll build off of this. So where we're going to talk about, for example, this is a public park in my neighborhood. It has this beautiful grassy space. It has a brand new playground that's attracting families, but it kind of has this open space with nothing in it. So a community association has come together and they're interested in installing a water feature sculpture of some kind. And why? They want to highlight, we want to highlight the stories of community residents within the sculpture design. We want the sculpture to attract more visitors to our park, to increase investment in our community park. And we want it to be interactive. It's right next to a playground. So we're thinking about young families, we're thinking about teenagers, we're thinking about older adults, intergenerational gatherings around the space. We want the sculpture to be interactive. So for today's example, this is our where, our what, and our why. So the next question you're going to need to figure out for your own project is who are the decision makers. So when it comes to selecting an artist for public art, there are many different ways to do this. This is my theme for the day. There are many ways. You have to pick the way that works best and makes the most sense for your project. So here are just some of the possible decision makers that might be appropriate for your project. So the first option, you might be putting together an artist selection committee. An artist selection committee is likely going to be made up of stakeholders, and those are the folks that are invested in your project. It could be made up of community representatives, could be a general public. You might be just open. Anyone in the neighborhood can help pick the artist for our community sculpture. You might have government officials who are involved. You might have a funding body or a donor. You know, some public art is funded by a private donor, so they might be involved in selecting the artist. You might have art consultants, organizers, and or a curator. That might be someone who isn't leading the project and they have some ideas about who the artist should be. So these are the typical decision makers. And for your project, recommend identifying who are the decision makers for my project. So for our example here, and I would love your participation to unmute or put in the chat, for our example of a community park where we want a water feature sculpture that's interactive and features local stories from residents, who might be the stakeholders for this project? And stakeholders are those that have some sort of vested interest in the project. So open the chat. Who do y'all think might be the stakeholders for this particular project?
I'd say members of the community organization.
Great. So members of the community organization, Wesley?
Property owners.
Property owners, absolutely. Who else might be?
Perhaps local jurisdictions, places that they might have like rules or other guidelines that you have to follow.
Absolutely. So for this example, this is a publicly owned park in our neighborhood. So for our landowners, that might be like the city of Baltimore, you know, the city of Sykesville. In the chat, anyone uses the park, right? So the families who come, the multi-generational visitors, perhaps the people who live around the perimeter of the park, right? Anyone else who we might be missing are the stakeholders. Okay, so those are our stakeholders. So for the purpose of this example, remember this is one example of many, we're going to put together a selection committee with representatives from each of those stakeholders. So I'm going to just type on the screen here so we don't get lost. Okay, so for our decision makers, we have our community residents, right? We have our residents, our families, we have our local government. I think we said the landowner, which would be in this instance, might be like Parks and Rec. We might have like a local council person in the park users, right? They might not be residents, but they might be people who come to the area. I would also say there might be businesses, like there might be an ice cream shop down the road, or maybe there's a business that rents out bikes to the bike, the user. So I would even put like local business owners. And they have a vested interest because they want more people to come to the park, right? And more people to rent bikes or eat ice cream while they're visiting. So for the sake of this example, what we would look for is like maybe 1 or 2 people from each of these categories that could represent their constituents on the committee. So we might invite 2 families to participate, 1 council person, 1 person from the Parks and Recreation Department, a park user who like the person that like helps pick up the trash every morning, like you want them involved, and any local business owner. So you can form your committee out of these different people who care and are invested in the success of the park. So those are our decision makers. The next thing we need to know is our timeline. So when and how is this project going to happen? Are you working with a short timeline or a long timeline? Do you have a lot of time to recruit artists, or do you need to know the artist by next week? That's going to change your method and how you approach selecting an artist. So for this example, this is going to be our time. We have about a year to do this, so we can invest a little more time in finding an artist. So for this example, we're going to do an open call for 2 months. We're going to look for artists to apply. We are going to review applications over like a month and a half. We'll let artists know if they made the cut and if they were selected at the end of November. And then we'll give them some time to make the work. And we want to install by June, and there's going to be a party on June 15th. So we know for sure the artist needs to be completed with their work by June 15th. So again, knowing your timeline is really important to how you're going to select an artist. Okay, so the last component of key decisions that you want to make is the how. And if you joined recently, I do have a PDF in the chat you can use to follow along with us. So the process, how are we going to pick an artist, right? So within that, you have kind of 3 sub-decisions. One is selection process, evaluation criteria, and community engagement. And I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail, then I'll circle back to our example. So one way an artist can be selected is what I'm calling the organizer's pick. That's the person who's in charge of the project. It might be a government official. It might be someone from a nonprofit. It could be an artist who is leading the project. It's typically one person that makes the selection of the artist, and they are selecting the artist based on their own research, their own network, or referrals from their network. Another method is called request for proposals. This is typically an open call, like you're putting out there like, hey, all artists in Maryland, apply for this project. And artists submit a design for you to look at, and they're selected for the project based off the design that they create. A request for qualification. That's typically an open call. Again, you're putting it out there like, hey, all the artists in the DMV, apply to this project. And artists submit examples of work they've already done. They're saying, this is the type of work that I do. And the artist is selected based off of their past work and their previous artworks. Another option is an invitational call. This is when you are putting the word out and you're saying directly to an artist, hey, artist, I like what you do. I'm interested in you applying for this project. I want you, specific artists, to apply. And maybe you send out an invitation to a small group, or it might even be just 1 or 2 artists. It could be more than that. So these are 4 common processes for selecting an artist. And I'm going to go into more detail, but these are like the 4 general categories. So some pros and cons. So when we're talking about organizers pick, some pros of using this method, you are really leaning on the expertise of that organizer's pick. So if they're a curator or they're an artist or they're the nonprofit leader, you're leaning on their expertise. It can be relationship based. You know, if you are working, let's say, with a community center and they already have an artist who's doing after school programming at that place, you might want to continue that relationship with that artist to have them do a mural at the same community center. It can streamline the process. If you already know the artist, you already know what you want, you don't have to go through the selection process, which can be lengthy. And another pro is it can build on previous projects and partnerships. Cons. An organizer's pick can be biased, right? You're really limiting who you pick based off of who you already know. So there's a lot of room for exclusivity, subjectivity, and bias in that process. And it can have limited input from the wider community. So you're not including stakeholders, you're not including the general public. It's just the organizer's pick of the artist. Okay, a request for proposals. So again, this is when you ask an artist to create a design and send it in for review. Okay, pros. Some of the pros for a request for a proposal is it can be open to the general public. It gives the artist the opportunity to show you exactly what they would make. You can see concepts up front. You are going to have really clear expectations. You know, I'm looking for this sculpture and you can see if the artist can meet your expectations. And gives the opportunity for the artist to directly respond for what you're looking for. They can prove to you or not that they can meet the requirements of the project. So cons of a request for proposals. It can be high burden on the artist. You're asking the artist to do work. You're asking for them to create a design. It can take days, weeks for them to create a proposal for you. It can be a potential misalignment. So you might not have opportunity for artists to meet with the community. You know, you're just saying, hey, make us that sculpture. And they don't necessarily have the opportunity to meet with the families who come to the park who would be interacting with that sculpture. And it can incur costs for artists. So if artists are spending days to weeks creating the proposal, they might not be compensated for that time, and that would certainly be a barrier. Request for qualifications, some of the pros, some of the cons. So again, a request for qualifications is when you're asking artists, show us your past work and what you're capable of, and we will pick you based off of your record of work. So pros, you can have a really diverse application pool. It can focus on the artist's past experience. You can really see, okay, they've done all of these types of projects before. There's more opportunity for community engagement and revisions. It can be open to the general public, and it is less time intense for the artist. So the artist will only invest time in creating a proposal and a design after they have been issued a contract and guaranteed payment. So typically artists are going to put more time and investment in your project if they know they won the contract and they know they're going to get paid. Okay, cons. This can be a greater risk for decision makers. As the review committee, you're not going to see exactly what the artist is going to make for you. You're making your decision based off of work they have made previously. You're not going to see the artist's vision. Like, you're not going to see a visual representation of the artist's vision for your project. And because it is less time of commitment for artists, you can likely see a higher quantity of applications, which can be good and time consuming. Okay, invitational call. This is, again, when you are inviting specific artists to apply. So an advantage of this is you really can have like quality control. You're only asking artists to apply who you think can meet the requirements of the project. You're going to have a reduced volume of applications to review. You can have a very targeted selection. Like for our example, we really want someone who has experience in making a water sculpture fountain. We're only going to ask artists who have that experience to apply. Sometimes when you do an open call to anyone, you can get your sculpture artist, but you might also get your mural artist, and you might also get your quilting artists that are not going to be qualified for your project. You can build upon established relationships, and it can be streamlined because you're reviewing fewer number of applications. The cons, again, you can have limited diversity in your pool. You can be perceived as exclusive or less transparent, and there's more room for potential or implicit bias in that process. So I'm curious, for those who are here, if you have selected an artist, let me know in the chat if you have used any of these 4 methods before. So again, all 4 of them are organizer's pick, request for proposals, request for qualifications, invitational call. And if you've been an artist and if you have applied to any of these, let me know which ones you have been familiar with. All right, so I'm going to go back to our example of the process. Thank you, Toby. All of the above. So for today's example, we're talking about our water fountain in the park. I'm going to share one way that we could select an artist. And again, this is one way of. Okay, so this is going to be our example. This is certainly not the only way to do this. So I just want to provide a template that you can build off and tweak that makes sense for you. So for this example, we're going to do a request for qualifications. That's going to be our process, and our decision makers are going to be our artist selection committee, as we stated before, right? Like the artist selection committee is going to have representatives from families, business, government, local council member. So we're going to, first step, we're going to publish an RFQ. That's our request for qualifications. Okay, this is the overview. So it's going to be a 5-step process, and I'm going to go in like more detail so you can really see how that process would unfold. So one way to do this is you would publish a request for qualifications. A question I have received multiple times this year is, what should be included in my request for qualifications? Right here, this is a good template of what should be included in that document. So you're saying, okay, hey, artists out here in the world, I want to know. These are all of the things that we want to know. We have about the project, and we want you to apply based off of this information. And Olu, I will get to your question in a moment. Okay, so this would be step 1. You make the request for qualifications and you publish it like on your website, email, etc. So for this example, our application requirement, we're going to require that the artist prepare for our review is contact information, who's the artist, a resume, and 10 work samples. We're also going to require a statement of interest. So I like to keep these short, but it's an opportunity for the artist to explain why they want to work on your project. So for our example, you know, we were looking for an artist to say like, I love working in public parks. I'm an expert at making interactive sculpture with multi-generational stakeholders or whatever. We wanted their opportunity to be like, yes, I am the right artist for this project, and let me explain to you why. Then you need to be able to accept applications. So there are many ways to do this. There's some virtual resources. You can set up profiles on these various websites. Some incur costs, some of them are free. And you can have the artist submit applications through these. You also can accept them via email, whatever makes most sense for you. Then the committee is going to review those applications and make sure they're eligible and score the artist. You can do this as a group. You can also do it independently. So you can send, you know, through many of these virtual portals, you can send your committee members a list of artists and they can click through and see the artwork and give the artist scores. So for the committee to score the artist, you're going to need some selection criteria. And here's some examples. Selection criteria varies widely. There's just one way you can do it. You can say, we're going to judge the artist based off of their experience. You know, do they have examples of public art that exists in public parks? Do they have experience working with permanent materials that can handle water, that's safe for children? And then a statement of interest. How great do they write that paragraph that explains why they should be the best artist for your project? All of the slide deck and this recording will be shared. Okay, this is what a scoring criteria could look like. So for this example, there are only 2 questions. Each are worth 50%. And this can be your scoring rubric. You know, it's not unlike when you're in school and you got a paper graded on a rubric. Okay, so after all of the artists, after the artist selection committee has scored the artist based off your selection criteria, they can then advance to round 2. In round 2, you're going to be just dealing with a smaller group. So let's say in round 1, you had 100 applicants, and then everyone scores and you narrow it down, maybe in the top 20. And around top 20, you're going to rescore them into your semifinalist. So you might use the same criteria again. You're just asking your committee, okay, you had 100, you gave them scores. We averaged everyone's scores together. We got down to 20. These are our top 20. Let's rescore out of just these 20 and get down to our semifinalists. So in this example, they're inviting the semifinalists to come do an interview. So they would sit with the artist selection committee, share with the committee why they're interested in that project, and then the committee can ask them questions to see if they're a good fit for the type of project they want. These are examples, again, of selection criteria, which can vary widely based on your project. But for this example, these are the selection criteria they're going to use in the interview. They're going to look at examples. They're going to look at engagement. For this project, they really want the artists to meet with the families that come to that park, right? So they want you to sit out there and engage. So they want to hear from the artist. How are you going to engage? How are you going to listen? Feasibility, based on the artist's past projects. Can you assess, are they capable of making your project on schedule within budget? And do they have experience working with durable materials? Can they install artwork safely for the community and interaction? So that would be the selection criteria. And after those interviews, the artist selection committee could then select one artist that they would then award a contract with. And the artist would be, after they award the contract, then the artist would begin the design process. So I have a few notes, and then I want to open it up to discussion and help. If anyone has further questions, we can go from there. So a few notes. As you're considering your process, what makes sense for your timeline, your budget, your community, things to consider. Who should be included in the process? Does my committee and my method include key stakeholders? Does my committee represent the demographic and geographic diversity in my area? Who's in the room? to make these decisions who's not in the room. Why aren't they in the room? How can we include everyone that should be here? How is the project being marketed? So for example, if you're looking for a public vote and you only put your vote on Facebook, but the families at the park don't follow you on Facebook, that's not going to be an equitable process, right? You need to go where the people are, where the stakeholders are. How can you be clear and transparent? So really clarifying in your documents that you put forth how the process is being conducted. These are ways to increase the equity throughout the process. Training. You might consider doing some training for your selection committee. If you're working with government officials, local officials, the general public, they might not be familiar with public art. They might only want to see art that they think, according to them, is good art. So you might want to open some training time to talk through what you're looking for, what is the project goals, scope. Make sure everyone has a common understanding of the rubric or however the decision is being made. I have to say this, but I think you all know this. Pay an artist for their time and creativity. So if you're asking an artist to develop a unique artwork proposal, best practice is to pay them. If you are asking an artist to do any kind of community engagement, public event, listening session, best practice, make sure they are paid for that time. If you're asking them to travel to a site, to do to the project, please call them. I'm sorry, please pay them. Depending on the project, you may or may not pay them for doing an interview. Some projects do pay artists to come do an interview, that depends. And in some instances, it is appropriate to pay the artist selection committee members. That is based on the project, assuming there's no conflict of interest in the way that, in the manner that they're being paid. For those who are going to apply for the Public Art Across Maryland Planning Grant, you can put into your grant payment for the artist to participate in the artist selection process and for the artist selection committee members to be paid. Those are eligible expenses in our grant program. Okay, so that is my overall spiel of how pathways to select an artist. I'm going to answer the 2 questions in the chat. And then if anyone is willing to share their project and we can work as a group to help you make kind of resolve some of these decisions, I think that would be a great learning opportunity. Okay, so first question in the chat. What if there needs to be some preparation before? Is that something that should be taken on before the artist, or the artist should be responsible? Okay. For example, a wall repair before a mural painting. That is such a good question. It's going to depend a little bit on your budget and your organizational structure, but I would recommend, when possible, to do any sort of site preparation in advance. So if you have a wall that has water damage, I would take care of that before you have the artist on board. Some artists are experienced enough to do like maintenance to their walls, but I wouldn't assume that the artist I'm going to hire is equipped to do that. They're not necessarily contractors. So when possible, I would do that in advance. And that would be the same for any side of like landscaping, wall repair. You know, if that can be done outside of the artist's budget, that you're going to get more art per your budget. Okay, question 2. Is there a need to engage stakeholders prior to the artist selection? Is it usual practice to only engage community once an artist is selected? Excellent. Stakeholders can be engaged throughout the entire process. So I would engage them as soon as possible. So in the example of our, that we are using today, like our water fountain in the park, I think it would be best practice before you decide you need a water fountain in the park to ask the stakeholders, are you interested in having art in this area? What kind of art would you like to see? And let's just assume that that community engagement led to them saying, yeah, we want something interactive in water here. That would be great. So my recommendation is that community engagement should be throughout the whole process. And you might learn that they don't want art there, and that's okay. And like the artist should engage with the community as well as the organizers in advance of initiating a project. Lynn, do you have a recommended project timeline or steps needed for a public art project? Kind of. I have to say this again. Every public art project is so different. So it's hard to give a blanket answer to that. We are seeing projects that are done within 3 to 5 months. We are literally working on projects right now that are 5 years. But in general, the steps are the planning of the project, the who, the what, the where, the why. The next step would be the artist selection, then the design of the project, then the installation of the design, fabrication, installation, celebration. Those would be the 6 steps that I think all projects are going to go through. Oh, favorite question here. How do you determine fair compensation for a project? Ryan, feel free to help me with this one. I will say that is, again, super hard to answer. It depends on your budget, and it depends on the type of work you want and the type of artist you're working with. So when you have a $200,000 public art project, you're going to be paying your artist more, right? That's more responsibility. It's likely you're going to require more experience versus if you're doing a $5,000 mural. So that's like, we work with projects on both ends of that spectrum. That's why I'm like, it's wide. But in general, like when we see projects that are paying artists to put together like a proposal, like a design proposal, typically see artists being paid $1,000 to $2,500 for a proposal. I recommend that all artists know what their hourly rate is, what their weekly rate is, and that they should be the one telling you. Like, let's say you select artist B, and it's going to be a mural that's 25 square feet. The artist should be able to tell you, my rate is this. And if you need to determine a budget before you know what artist you're working with, I would ask around for some friends that do comparable projects and see what they're charging to give yourself a range. And Ryan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Okay, we're testing a new microphone over here at the office. So, yeah, I think you've covered a lot of it. I think the other, I think you nailed it with the know your hourly rate, and that if you're ever in a position where you're working, you know, where you know which artist you want to hire or the kind of artist you want to hire, that you could ask them kind of what the rate is, or square footage rate sometimes for a mural project is another way to approach it. But often we're in these positions where we're starting with a budget and working towards a goal. And so determining kind of, I think it also goes back to those issues around what kind of site prep needs to be included, and whether that will be part of the artist's obligation or whether it can be performed by an outside person, and then whether the artist has an input onto that. So do you want to prep that wall to be all white, or would they have preferred a different base color? Or are you going to pour that pedestal so they can put work on top, or would they have preferred to design it to receive their piece? That's getting away from the fair compensation point, but I think it would impact your budget.
Yes, I think the more clear answer to a nuanced question is make sure it's explicit. Like if you know going into the project, you can only afford to pay $1,000, make sure the artists know that, because there's artists who will work for $1,000 and there's artists who won't. So the more clear you can be, the better. Yes, typically there's another question about artist fee. Typically the artist fee is separate from the materials. So if you're doing a mural, you typically would put the cost of like the paint, the equipment separate from the artist fee. But I have seen projects that just the artist says, pay me $10,000 flat and I'll take care of everything from there. So yeah, there's not a requirement. You can do that based on your project.
And that might be a good question to ask if people do come with it. Like if we're using this mural as an example, if someone says my square footage rate for a mural is $12, you might say, well, does that include you paying yourself, or is that just for the production and you need a fee on top of that? I think being transparent and clear in these conversations, don't make assumptions, just have a lot of communication.
Yeah, and saying, does that mean you're going to fill the holes in yourself, or do you expect us to fix the flashing on the wall before you get to site? All right, these are wonderful questions. I'm asking, is there anyone who'd be willing to share a little bit about their project, and we can workshop it and work through these decisions to help you decide which method you wanted to use for your project. All right, Olu, let's do it.
Well, I live in a housing co-op, and the wall faces the street, and it is it has a mural on it that's God knows how old. And I think that, improving the mural would help a lot of things, including sort of little like petty crimes that happen and things like that. And it's also facing a school. So it being somewhat more aesthetic and pleasing would really help everybody. So we would cut the chase of having to ask other people, because everybody that lives there is a co-owner. But the membership is kind of in disarray, in that the current leadership is so yeah, in some ways it would be easy, because if we had some internal committee, your ideas about diversity had me thinking, like, what does that mean for our group? It's very diverse in age. So there's a lot of elders there, people who've been there for decades, who have very strong opinions, who might fight, people with sort of some newer ideas or different aesthetics, for example. So diversity would be really interesting. We're kind of in the middle of a lawsuit with the current leadership. So there is some divisiveness as well that we may have to overcome to get something done. And also the current leadership would absolutely not participate. So I guess I have to wait till they move to the side to actually, or could we start planning? So that's like one question that I have. I don't know if I present enough information for input, but could we start? I have faith that the members will kind of rescue the thing, and I think it would be an amazing morale booster to have this right away. It's far from my priority. We've been on the tax sale list a couple times under this person's mismanagement, etc. However, I think of it as a visible thing that's a morale booster that's showing a new era. So I would love if there was a way that we could get started on a process.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have a pretty clear where, what, and why. So I think we're good on that. Decision makers, I do think that from what you shared, you have an opportunity and a challenge. So if you were to put together a committee, while I would certainly prioritize equity and inclusion and who's invited, you also want people who are open to the process and cooperative, right? So I would keep that as one of your criteria for who you select. Could you start planning? Yes, you certainly could. We have seen projects where they plan, they do everything, and then the wall falls through. So my question is, do the members who are interested in being cooperative have rights to painting on that wall, or do you need the ownership sign off to actually paint it?
That's a great question. That's all goes even down to, we have to have an annual meeting, and we were going to hire private security because of, the current leadership has somebody who threatens people. So it's like, whose security is this? Whose lawyer is it? So we're not the signer, we're not the board. The board is illegitimate. So that's a great question, in terms of like, sort of, we would definitely be overriding the current board to do some things in terms of like, if they could take us to court, or if it was already done. What does that mean? I don't know, but I hope that they're not going to be there for long is the real answer.
Again, you know the nuance of all of the things, but from what you're telling me, I think the question of who has the ultimate sign off on putting paint in the wall would be your next your next step. And if you're able to work around those politics but still have authorization to paint, I would move forward. If you don't, I would wait until you have a clear path to putting paint on the wall before you select an artist.
Would we be able to apply for the planning grant, for example?
Yes, you would be eligible, and feel free to email me directly once you have more answers to these questions, and we can talk through how to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love when public art is both an opportunity and a challenge. Okay, would anybody else would like to share where they're at with their project? Get some feedback. Monica.
Okay, so I'm sorry I'm late. I got this anyway. So we have a planning grant and we've gotten RFQs, a lot of RFQs. But now, so, and you may have gone over this already, like you just said, so part of the design process is deciding where, because we're doing wayfinding, where we're going to be doing. You know, that's part of the process, is deciding what locations and what to put where.
Yeah.
So that sort of, so we're already in the, so when you just mentioned that about getting permissions first, that kind of queued me up to ask, like, you know, I don't know, like what's the, like we don't have that information yet. So moving forward, as we have our designs and all that kind of stuff, you know, what does that look like, you know, in terms of getting permissions? Because that's going to be something that I'm sure I'm going to have to deal with. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is something that's hard to answer in a statewide call, because every jurisdiction is different. But in general, finding out who owns the property is a great place to start. So most jurisdictions are going to have some sort of like tax property website where you can look up the owner of the property if you don't already know.
Okay.
So that's the first place to start. And you want to get, ultimately you need the landowner to sign an agreement. It's typically called a right of entry that says like, yes, you have access to this space. If you're going to paint on this wall, or you can come and pour a foundation or attach to my roof, like that. It needs to be some sort of agreement. In that agreement would certainly include, yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nora. I just was going to.
Okay.
All right, if you want.
Before I get too far down the road of agreements, shameless plug for my public art webinar with Maryland Volunteer for the Lawyers for the Arts on November 7th. And we're going to talk about what needs to be involved in all contracts for public art. So if you're hiring an artist, if you're getting contracts, you need a partnership agreement. Like, I'm not a lawyer, they can answer these questions. But in general, you need some sort of agreement between yourself and the landowner that should also say who owns the work, who's responsible for maintaining the work. You know, like if the water starts tearing the artwork apart, who's responsible for fixing that? And then depending on your jurisdiction, this is where it gets different. So some places are going to have a public art committee. This is someone that serves on, like, is responsible for public art in that area, and you might have to get approval for your public art to be installed by a government body. You might need to get a permit that says I can put a scaffolding up on this sidewalk to install this mural. So that is really going to be on you all to research what is required. So if you're in Catonsville, I'm sure there's some additional hoops you're going to have to. So the more urban spaces are going to have more requirements, right? Permits, approvals. If you're in a historic district, you're going to need a historic approval. The more rural areas are going to have different rules as well.
Yeah, and I just want to add in there are resources that are usually maintained by the planning department or the Department of Transportation, if it's like a sidewalk or right of way. And those are good places to start. If you have trouble navigating the materials on your own, I would contact those agencies. But specifically, I put in links to parcel maps for Baltimore County and Baltimore City, where you can turn on and off filters to figure out if it's a vacant lot, who might own that, if it's a little patch of green space between the church and the park, and you're like, is it public, is it private? Those are how you get down to like the details of actually who the real property owner is. But as far as like something like signage or a main street area, that's usually always going to be, if it's on the sidewalk, it's always going to be like a Department of Transportation or Department of Planning you'll have to work with and figure out that rate of entry that Nora talked about.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for all of our public art friends on the call, location permits, it can take time. I would not wait for the last minute for any of those things, especially you have to go through approval process by a board or if the city owns your property.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm going to keep piling. Like, start with those people when you're putting out your RFQ or your call. So, you know, if it turns out that the Department of Transportation says any signage needs to be 2 feet from the roadway, you know, like figure that out before you put the call out, maybe, or pick contractors that know how to work with those agencies.
Okay. Monica, did you have any other questions about your artist selection process?
I mean, we have like over 30 RFQs right now, which is a good problem, except we're trying to get it down to 3 semifinalists. Ryan's already given me a rubric, and we have a selection committee forming. I don't know if you have anything that could help it, you know, like.
So when you say RFQs, you mean you have like 30 people who applied to your call? Great. That's great. Yeah, you gotta do the work. You just gotta go through artist by artist, score them, and average your scores, pick the top, and have that hard conversation as a committee and narrow it down.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Anyone else want to workshop their selection process?
Oh, Nora, I just had one other question. When do we need to have funding in place? Do we need to have funding in place prior to selecting an artist? Or is there advice that you would give for a group that decides to select an artist before the funding is in place?
Okay, follow-up question to that. Would you need any funding to pay artists or the artist committee to select the artist?
The selection to pay the art. When you say pay the artist, you mean pay the artist to produce the work? Or
like, so in some of the examples we shared today, you would pay an artist to show up for an interview, or you would pay an artist to create a design proposal before selecting them.
Right. So that, let's say that funding is in place.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. All right. So the answer is it depends on your project. We have seen many projects that select an artist for a project without guaranteed funding to make the work. That is fine. For the Maryland State Arts Council's public art grants, it's kind of how it's set up. It's set up for you to get funding after you have an artist. So that's fine as far as our funding sources. That being said, I would be explicitly clear with your artist. Hey, artist, we want you to do this project. We don't have funding yet. So you don't want them thinking that as soon as they get selected, they can send you an invoice for $30,000 and you don't have the money, right? So I would just be clear, like, we want to do this project. We're going to do this project. We don't have funding yet. We don't know how long it's going to take, right? So that the expectation is like, sometimes it can take 2 to 3 years to get the funding for the project, right? We have seen examples of that where the artist is like, okay, I'll wait around for 2 to 3 years. Like, we have seen that work. And be clear with your artist.
Okay, you said, just can you repeat what you said about your grant program? So when you apply for the your grant for the art, the one that's due on December 19th, we need to have selected an artist prior to. Okay. Thank you.
To be even more clear, we have 4 different types of public art funding, and I spent an hour explaining them in great details. I'm going to give you the 30-second version, but I can send you the recording later. But
Okay,
if you're creating a new type of art, you can apply just for planning money. That is money to fund your selection process, to do your community engagement, to get your permits all in a row. So you can apply for that money without an artist. The other kind of funding we have is a new artworks project grant, and you have to have an artist to be eligible for that project.
Okay, thank you. That is very helpful. And the planning grant is just $10,000.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, I know I have a few more questions in the chat. Let me try to get to them all. Excuse me while I skim here.
Here, Nora, I can jump in to answer one of them. One says, does MSAC have a list of artists approved for PAM, or can any artist based in Maryland be selected? So any artist based in Maryland can be selected, but we do have a resource that might be helpful, and I'll put this in the chat. This is a link to the Maryland Public Artist roster. That's not to say that everybody on this roster is Maryland artists, but there are filters. Everybody on this list has been approved to be selected for artwork commissions, a program that Nora and I manage. But under labels on that page, you can scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a label that's called Asterisk Maryland-based studio. It's at the very bottom of the list, and you can use that to search Maryland artists that are on the roster. That can be a helpful place to start. There you go.
You have to scroll. But there they are.
And then you can filter that further to look for sculptors or muralists or anything.
Yeah, like 2D, public art, etc. Okay, if I miss your question in the chat, please put it back in the chat because it's lost at this point. Okay, so that I'm going to officially end our webinar. Oh, I was going to put our YouTube channel in here too. Okay, we're done. If you want to hang on for my recording of how to apply for our public art webinar, I will have it in the chat momentarily.
I put it in the chat, Nora.
Oh, great. Already taken care of. Thank you.
It's on our YouTube page.
Yeah. And I will send out the recording of this sometime in the next week. And with that, have a wonderful day. Happy public arting. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, Kelly, yeah. Okay, we will open the queue. I'm going to stop the recording. Kelly?